Yeah, there. Here we are with what I intend to be the last episode in this somewhat beautifully made kilt. Actually, it is beautifully made because I've completely rebuilt it. So, summary of work. We'd had a bit of back and forth with the customer about reducing it in length. And my initial plan, my initial thought, was to keep it at the length that had been made, but lower the strap and the buckle down, which has the net effect of shortening a kilt because the strap and the buckle are placed relative to the natural waist. If you lower them, you're pulling the kilt up, in effect shortening it. The reason for that is because the customer is over 1,000 miles away and I hadn't measured him myself. And of course, he's not in a position to pop by for a trial fitting. And I was made a bit wary because I'd had a customer within the last 4 or 5 months who, for the first time in my experience, the relationship, the ratio between his natural waist, his widest part of his seat, and the top of his knee was atypical. And I didn't spot it. Even after having him back, realizing what had happened and measured, I couldn't quite put my finger on what was different here. So in consequence, the kilt, we made it work, but initially the kilt was a little too short. And of course you can't put material back on. So I was again, concerned that it shook my confidence a little bit, which is good for us actually. So, but then if you remember, initially I was going to rob the pleats from either side, but the cutout in the fish is so great that wouldn't work because they'd be visible. So I pulled it completely apart, pressed it flat, recalculated the pleats, sewed it up again. So yeah, so we've reduced it in height because as soon as I reached that point, I thought, carry on as usual, reduce it in height. So here we are, apron shaped, pleats done. Now on the inside, because again, there wasn't very much seam allowance. In fact, there was very slight seam allowance. So what I've done is I've put on a patch. I've extended the seam allowance here, and you can see the seam there. I sewn a flat seam, running stitch, turned it over, sewn a fell stitch, and then another flat stitch from the outside to reinforce it. So that gives us enough material so that canvas won't be peeking through when we sew the buttonhole in the lining. Also, because buttonholes erode over time, I'm hoping that this extra layer of cloth, which has canvas in between it, will be more resistant to erosion, or at least it'll handle it better. We'll see how that works. Now, so I'm all set now to finish the front apron and carry on. But looking inside, we can see that the original maker, and I can't fault them for this because I don't think there's not many kilt makers that really plan for future, like severe future alterations, right? But this unfortunate cut had been made. Don't know why. Not going to criticize them for it. But I think it might have had something to do with the original buttonhole, which was up here somewhere. But as you can see, I've basically done a more not a cadaver seam, a baseball stitch to sew it flat, and then backed it all up there. Incidentally, I might as well out myself right now. The reason why I start with the first pleat rather than start by sewing the apron to the first pleat is that by the time I finish, or when I finish sewing the pleats, if this number isn't exactly what I predicted, right? All I have to do, because I'd predicted 16 inches, I wound up sewing, 15 and 15 and a half, so a short half an inch. All I have to do then, I can compensate that. I mean, you can't, we mustn't use this to conceal bad work. I mean, if you've done a really lousy job of sewing the pleats, you have to go back and do it again. But that half inch shortfall, we can make up just by adjusting the apron a little bit wider. And frankly, remember, the whole thing was, right from the beginning, we were determined that the apron was going to be too small and we wanted it wider. Somebody very recently in the comments asked about how, because you can't steek the hidden pleats, how do I keep it from falling down and having that sawtooth sticking out the bottom? As you've seen here, I've used a herringbone stitch, Well, this is there to stabilize this cut, but this is also what I do to capture the top of the deep pleat so it doesn't sag down. The other thing that I do is when I sew this seam, having sewn the seam, I then go in here and I sew along to hold this in place against the canvas. On top of that, when we sew the top band on, the top band is also going to be attached to the canvas in this, so it winds up being pretty secure. So backing up a bit to that moment where you wonder how your pleats turn out, right? Now this fellow, 33 waist, I bring it around in the radius, I bring the tape out to 33, I'm just going to mark it, 33, and then I mark the canvas there. Very quickly, I can then see how wide the front apron is going to be at the waist, 17 inches, just like that. It's a nice little trick to eliminate error, because sometimes, even if your math is good, sometimes the numbers wind up with the wrong answer. So just running out the tape like that, bam, you see immediately where how wide it must be. So from here, I'm going to sew the apron. I'm going to see if because I didn't remove much cloth at all, but this fringed edge had 2 layers. I'm going to see if by using these pieces, that there's 2 pieces from the top, if I can add another layer of fringe, incorporating this into it to make it a more rich effect. We'll see if that works out. So I'm going to, once we wrap this video, I'm going to get to it. Hope my mission is to have this ready for its first press by end of day, let it dry overnight, lining in tomorrow, call the customer and tell them it's on its way. Thank you.